Hey there, everyone. Hope you're doing very well. Today, I wanted to jump into our final week of topics, and I thought it would be interesting to wrap the semester up with a discussion of some monuments. A lot of the monuments that we associate with American history were built during the 1800s, and so they relate to a lot of the history that we're talking about or have talked about. And so I thought that's a worthwhile pursuit here. And so today we'll talk about the Washington Monument, and then next time focus on the U.S. Capitol building and the Statue of Liberty, and maybe a few others there. But those are the main areas of focus because those are some that are very representative of the period. So I think you'd find that enjoyable. So the Washington Monument, for such a simple looking structure, it's just the tall obelisk there on the National Mall, you would think that the decision on it and the construction and all of those various factors would be relatively simple. You wouldn't think that it would take a better part of a decade or more to get the project off the ground, and then 4 decades to actually get it built. That's for somebody that was part of the founding of the country, that seems rather odd. But this was obviously to honor George Washington, the first president of the United States, who passed in 1799. So right there at the very beginning of the 1800s. And so we're in the 1800s and people are interested in honoring him. So this is going to take a while for the idea to get off the ground, and then once it does, then the construction will get started, and then it's going to take a long time. So it's going to take until the end of the century for this to actually happen. It's a quite the process, but it's interesting because it's quite the process, and it sort of encompasses a lot of the history of the 1800s within the building of this thing. So let's jump in here and learn a little bit more about that. Very complex path to get to this point here. Okay, so the proposals. After the Revolutionary War, there were pushes to create a monument to George Washington while he was alive, but then especially right after he died. Everybody saw him as a great figure. That was not in dispute, but they also saw him as a Federalist, which we've talked about well at the beginning of the semester. And Washington being a Federalist was a problem for those who weren't. And once the anti-Federalists, the Jeffersonian group, come to power, and they do come to power, they tended to block monuments to Federalists, and so Washington's monument doesn't get, or a major monument doesn't get off the ground. They managed to create a statue of him on horseback. I forgot where they put that. I have to look back and see. And then once George Washington himself passed in 1799, a congressional committee approved for there to be another monument built in his honor, one more fitting the stature of the person. But as Congress tends to do, there was much squabbling over the type of memorial, and then they squabbled over funding. They thought about having a special tomb put into place in the National Capitol building, but the George Washington's family didn't like the idea of relocating his gravesite, and so they scrapped that idea. And so sometimes when people don't have a real clear idea of what they're going to do, or they just end up fighting about it for way too long, they just shelved it. They just shoved the idea aside and said, we'll revisit this at another time, and that's pretty much what they did. People over time might see Washington in less political terms. People knew the guy or knew his party or his subordinates or whatever, and so as you step back away from time, a decade, 2 decades, you see that with, modern day presidents. The various presidents are hated or loved with intense ferocity during their time in office, but after they've been out of office for a decade or 2 decades or 3 decades, they sort of take on an elder statesman kind of status, and they're welcomed at lots of public events, and you'll see presidents of various parties all sitting right next to each other at important funerals or who knows what. But it's that kind of thing. Time heals a lot of wounds. And so by 1833, this is when we get the Washington National Monument Society. This is basically a citizens group that believes there should be a significant monument to this first president of the United States. And so over the next 3 years, so this is 1833 when it gets kicked off, it'll take until 1836, and they're able to raise $28,000. So that's somewhere along the lines of about $1 million today. Quite the sum. They know that it's going to take that, because if you're going to do any kind of significant construction, it's going to take capital to do that. And so, as with many public monuments or even public buildings, what many groups like this do, they held a contest. You've seen contests for everything from the Vietnam War Memorial in D.C. today, all the way back to the rebuilding of the British Parliament after the Great Fire took it, and that's how it got its look today. This is the same thing. They held a contest and got quite a few designs. Here is the language for the contest. It is proposed that the contemplated monument shall be like him in whose honor it is to be constructed, unparalleled in the world, and commensurate with the gratitude, liberality, and patriotism of the people by whom it is erected. It should blend stupendousness with elegance, and be of such magnitude and beauty as to be an object of pride to the American people, and of admiration to all who see it. Its material is intended to be wholly American, and to be of marble and granite, brought from each state, and that each state may participate in the glory of contributing material as well as in funds to its construction. So that's the plan. And they picked a winner. They picked Robert Mills of Baltimore. Mills had previously designed a monument in Boston to honor George Washington. This is it here, still there today. You can go check it out, and it has a little bit of a similar vibe to what we're thinking here. He apparently had a liking for columns and obelisks, and so this was a Greek column with the president, a statue of the president on top, and it has this square base to it, and so very much in the style of a lot of Washington, D.C. will take on, has that sort of Greek vibe to it. And so this is in that vein. This was started in 1815 and completed in 1829. So a good 15-year process, but it actually got accomplished. Robert Mills also designed U.S. Treasury Building and the old Patent Office. So he had some skill in addition to the interest in doing monuments to George Washington. And so they choose his design, and it's quite different than what we actually have today. Now take a look at this. Now there is an element, the tall thing in the middle, that is fitting to what we see today, but this whole bit down at the bottom is quite different. It's this, what you're looking at here actually has a little bit more in line with this, but he was the only one among the group to submit an obelisk, and so that's going to be what we end up with. But the initial plan was a circular building at the bottom, and this was going to be, ringed with nice columns, and there's going to be some 250 foot by 100 foot. And then from the center, you're going to get the 500-foot tall obelisk. And then among the columns where the plan was to have various Revolutionary War heroes, founding fathers, various statues to important people of that time period. And it's interesting here the choice of the obelisk, because that's not something that you see a lot of in public monuments. You see, various buildings a lot like this often, but the shape of the obelisk, that's Egyptian. They going back long ago, and so that's a very bold choice. A lot of the American culture doesn't really have any ties to ancient Egypt very much, and so that's is interesting. Maybe that was what caught people's eye. But these were used from Assyria to Rome. Typically, they were a single piece of rock, and that was how they kept them together in ancient times. This is going to be different because they're going to have to construct it out of stones, and so that'll be a different methodology on how they go about putting it together. The plan for this design is that it will be hollow inside with stairs so that people can go up from the top and use it as a viewing spot. And that is kept along with the general design of the obelisk, but ultimately they end up scrapping the whole base, as you know. The reaction was, all these get criticized, all the designs do, but they thought that it would be too costly to make it happen. They were thinking that it was going to cost about $1 million then, which was something along the lines of $20 million today, and they just didn't have the funding or the will to make that happen, and so the society chooses to they settle on just this center portion. And it's funny that these sort of very human random decisions that end up getting made end up becoming iconic in our own time, in our lives, but they're very, very human decisions at the time that they're made, and then they become sort of legendary and filled with great purpose. I think I'll pause there, and we'll come back and talk about the construction.